Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, General Mattis, and thank you for your willingness to continue to serve this country. I have read that in 2005, as commander of the Marine Corps Combat Development Command, that you asked researchers to, quote, unleash us from the tether of fuel and explore ways to improve the efficiency of military vehicles in order to reduce the strain that energy put on supply lines, because you, not only when you commanded the 1st Marine Division during the 2003 invasion, but you had also seen what happens when our troops outran their fuel supplies. So can you speak to why you think this is important, and will you, as Secretary of Defense, continue to support the military's effort to pursue alternative and more efficient sources of energy to reduce our reliance on conventional fuel supplies?
Yes, Senator, we will take advantage of every advance in terms of extending our legs, extending our energy efforts. And certainly there's a lot of progress that's been made. I've been living in Silicon Valley for the last several years, so you can understand my interest in what they're doing out there in the private sector.
Well, thank you. I think our military is way ahead of much of the rest of government and much of the private sector, and those are lessons that can be shared that will benefit the private sector as well. Chairman McCain talked about the threat that Russia poses, and listening to your responses, it sounded to me like you also believe that Russia poses a threat to the United States and to the, I think you said, the transatlantic alliance. Or today, for the first time since the fall of communism, American troops arrived in Poland as part of the European Reassurance Initiative. How important is it for us to continue these initiatives to reassure our European allies that we will continue to support them? And how concerned are you that some of President-elect Trump's statements with respect to continuing to support NATO, to support our allies in Europe, has undermined our ability to continue this initiative? And will you support the ERI continuing as Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I do support ERI. NATO, from my perspective, having served once as a NATO Supreme Allied Commander, is the most successful military alliance probably in modern world history, maybe ever. And it was put together, as you know, by the greatest generation coming home from a war to defend Europe against Soviet incursion by the military, their military. Yet the first time it went to war was when this town and New York City were attacked. It's the first time NATO went into combat. So my view is that nations with allies thrive and nations without allies don't. And so I would see us maintaining the strongest possible relationship with NATO.
Thank you. And are you concerned about some of the statements that President-elect Trump has made with respect to our historic European allies and to NATO? And how have you had a chance to have discussions with him, and how confident are you that he recognizes what you've just said about the importance of those relationships?
Senator, I have had discussions with him on this issue. He has shown himself open, even to the point of asking more questions and going deeper into the issue about why I feel so strongly. And he understands where I stand, and I'll work with the other members of the team, national security team, once the Senate confirms them, to carry these views forward.
Thank you. You talked about, I think Senator Inhofe raised the issue of readiness for our troops. And when you and I met, we also talked a little bit about the National Guard and the importance of the Guard as being part of the one force that we depend on. Readiness is obviously a concern for the National Guard as well. And in New Hampshire, for example, our National Guard has experienced a 32% decline in force structure since 2007, much more than many states that are smaller than we are. And they've had trouble with training rotations, resources, equipment, other aspects of readiness. Can you commit to us that you, in addition to trying to address readiness with our active duty forces, that you will also look at the Guard and Reserve and try and ensure that they also have access to what they need to be ready for deployment.
Senator, I share the chairman's view that we have shrunk our military capability, and one of the things that forces on us is the awareness it's not just a strategic reserve anymore in the National Guard, it's also an operational reserve. That means they have to be ready to go on very short notice. That's just a reality when we've shrunk our military to the point we have, yet not reduced our strategic obligations. So we are going to have to keep the National Guard and the reserves of all the armed forces at the top of their game. We can't deploy them without having them at a high state of readiness, mostly in equipment and training. There are some things, obviously, they don't do because they're not on duty 365 days a year. But as an operational reserve and strategic reserve, they'll be critical.
Thank you, General.